A person can spend so much time trying to please others that they barely notice when they begin to disappear from themselves. And when they finally do notice, it already feels too late to return to what truly mattered. Billy Graham observed this kind of wear as something deeply human. When someone lives constantly adjusting choices, words, and paths to meet external expectations and ends up forgetting their own purpose. What begins here is not a warning or a correction, but a direct reflection on living for others, on slowly losing one's sense of self, and on that unsettling moment when you realize your own life has been repeatedly postponed. At some point, many people begin to realize that their lives are no longer shaped by what they truly want, but by what is expected of them. This realization rarely comes suddenly. It develops quietly over time, while choices are adjusted, words are softened, and decisions are made with other people in mind. The person keeps going, believing they are being kind, responsible, considerate. Only later does something start to feel off. This conflict is common, yet rarely recognized for what it is. Living to please others often looks like maturity. It looks like cooperation. It looks like being easy to work with, easy to live with, easy to accept. The person becomes skilled at reading expectations, anticipating reactions, and avoiding disappointment. On the outside, everything seems fine. On the inside, something slowly fades. Many people live this way without realizing it. They say yes when they feel unsure. They stay quiet when something matters to them. They adjust their desires to fit what feels acceptable. Not because they are dishonest, but because they have learned that approval brings safety, while resistance brings tension. Over time, this pattern becomes natural. This conflict goes unnoticed because life continues to function. The person works, maintains relationships, fulfills responsibilities. There is no visible collapse, no obvious crisis, just a growing sense of distance from their own intentions. What they once wanted becomes unclear. What they once felt strongly about loses definition. Pleasing others gradually takes up more space. Decisions are filtered through how they will be received. Choices are measured by how they will affect relationships. The person begins to live reactively, adjusting rather than initiating. And without realizing it, their own sense of direction weakens. What makes this especially difficult is that it often feels wrong to question it. After all, being considerate is valued. Being agreeable is praised. Putting others first is encouraged. So when discomfort appears, it is usually dismissed. The person assumes they are simply tired, ungrateful, or confused. They rarely identify the deeper issue. Over time, a subtle loss takes place. The person may struggle to answer simple questions about what they want, what matters to them, or where they feel drawn. Not because they lack ability, but because they have spent so long adapting that their inner voice has grown faint. This conflict does not announce itself loudly. It does not interrupt daily life. It simply reshapes it. Many people feel it without fully understanding it, a quiet sense that they are living correctly, yet not truthfully, that they are present everywhere, yet absent from their own purpose. And often, by the time this realization surfaces, it carries the unsettling feeling that something important has already been postponed for too long. Billy Graham often reflected on how easily a person could lose themselves while trying to live well in the eyes of others. He did not see this as weakness or lack of character, but as a deeply human response to pressure, expectation, and the desire to belong. For him, the danger was not in caring about people, but in slowly replacing inner conviction with external approval. In his observations, this conflict formed when a person became overly attentive to how they were perceived. Choices were no longer guided by an inner sense of direction, but by how they would be received. Over time, the individual learned to adjust instinctively, changing tone, opinions, even life decisions, to avoid discomfort, rejection, or disappointment from others. Billy Graham understood that this process often began with good intentions, wanting peace, wanting harmony, wanting to avoid conflict. But when those intentions were not balanced by inner awareness, they led to a quiet erosion of purpose. The person continued to live responsibly, yet increasingly disconnected from why they were living the way they were. He paid close attention to the inner life of such individuals. What concerned him was not that they were busy or committed, but that they no longer listened to themselves. Their inner voice, at the place where meaning, conviction, and direction once formed, had been gradually overridden by the need to maintain approval. According to his understanding, purpose could not survive in an environment where self-awareness was absent. When a person stopped asking themselves what they believed, what they felt drawn toward, or what they were quietly resisting, their life became shaped by reaction rather than intention. They were moving but not choosing. Billy Graham noticed that many people in this state appeared stable and successful. They were reliable. They were respected. Yet inwardly, they carried a sense of emptiness that had no clear explanation. They felt tired without knowing why. Unfulfilled without having failed. Restless despite doing everything right. He did not interpret this as punishment or moral failure. He saw it as the natural outcome of prolonged self-neglect. When a person consistently prioritizes being acceptable over being authentic, something essential begins to withdraw. Not dramatically, but steadily. For Billy Graham, the most concerning aspect of this conflict was how unnoticed it remained. Because life continued to function, the loss of purpose went undetected. Years could pass before the person realized that their life had been shaped more by expectation than by calling. His perspective was never about blame. It was about awareness. He believed that many people did not abandon their purpose intentionally. They simply postponed it repeatedly, until one day they realized they no longer recognized it. Not because it was gone, but because they had stopped listening long enough for it to grow quiet. This was not a warning meant to provoke fear. It was an observation meant to invite honesty, a recognition that living for others without inner listening slowly shifts a person away from the life they were meant to inhabit. Not all at once, but enough that when they finally notice, the realization carries weight. In modern life, living to please others is often rewarded. Cooperation is praised, flexibility is expected. The ability to adapt quickly, to meet expectations, to keep things running smoothly becomes a survival skill. Over time, this environment trains people to adjust themselves constantly, often without noticing the cost. Work plays a central role in this process. Expectations are rarely stated clearly, yet they are deeply felt. Performance, availability, attitude, reliability, all are quietly monitored. Many people learn that staying agreeable feels safer than being honest. Saying yes feels easier than explaining hesitation. And slowly, work stops being just something they do and becomes something that shapes who they are allowed to be. Outside of work, the same pattern continues. Family dynamics, friendships, social roles all carry unspoken rules. Each setting seems to require a slightly different version of the self. The person adapts naturally, believing this is simply part of being mature. They become skilled at sensing what is expected and adjusting accordingly. Over time, this constant adjustment creates fatigue. Not physical exhaustion alone, but emotional tiredness. The effort of monitoring reactions, managing impressions, and staying acceptable never fully stops. Even moments that should feel free are shaped by awareness of how one is being perceived. At night, when activity slows, the weight of this becomes clearer. The day may have been full, productive, and socially successful. Yet there is often a vague dissatisfaction that lingers, a sense that much was done, but little was chosen freely. The person may struggle to identify what they actually wanted that day beyond fulfilling expectations. Distractions help soften this discomfort. Entertainment, scrolling. Busy schedules fill the space where questions might otherwise arise. As long as attention is occupied, there is no need to confront the quiet feeling that life is being lived on someone else's terms. This pattern does not feel dramatic. It feels normal. Everyone seems to be doing the same thing. Everyone appears busy, accommodating, responsible. And because this way of living is so common, it rarely raises concern. The person assumes the tiredness is just part of adulthood. But slowly, something changes. Decisions begin to feel heavier. Motivation becomes unclear. The future feels vague, not because options are lacking, but because direction has been lost. When so much energy goes into maintaining acceptance, little remains for exploring purpose. You might recognize this in subtle ways. Difficulty answering simple questions about what you want. A sense of relief when plans are cancelled, mixed with guilt for feeling that relief. The feeling that life is moving forward, yet something essential is not coming along with it. Modern life rarely encourages deep inner listening. Speed, productivity, and responsiveness are valued far more than reflection. In this environment, it becomes easy to live reactively, responding to needs, expectations, and pressures, while slowly losing contact with personal intention. This is how purpose is often forgotten, not through rebellion or failure, but through constant accommodation. The person does not abandon their direction. They simply delay it again and again until it becomes unfamiliar. And so the conflict deepens. Life remains full, but meaning feels thin. The person stays involved, responsible, and present for others, while feeling increasingly distant from themselves. Not because they made the wrong choices, but because they made them without space to listen inwardly. When the day finally slows down, and there is nothing left to respond to, something subtle begins to surface. The expectations fade for a moment. The roles relax. There is no one watching closely, no one waiting to be pleased, and in that space the person feels an unfamiliar stillness. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive as a clear thought. It comes as a quiet discomfort, a sense that something has been set aside for too long. Without the need to adjust, explain, or perform, the person notices how little of the day truly belonged to them. In this moment, there is often a strange mix of relief and unease. Relief because the effort of pleasing has paused. Unease because without that effort, a question lingers beneath the surface. Not spoken, not answered, just present. The mind revisits the day, not to judge it, but to sense it. Conversations replay, decisions echo, and beneath them all is the realization that many choices were shaped by what others needed, expected, or approved of. Very few were guided by a clear inner pull. Nothing is demanded here. This moment does not ask for change or confrontation. It simply reveals the distance between living in response to others and living in alignment with oneself. It allows that distance to be felt, without naming it, without fixing it. This pause does not last long. Soon the world resumes its pace, but while it exists, it leaves behind a quiet awareness that somewhere along the way the self was postponed, not intentionally, but consistently. And that awareness remains, even after the noise returns. When the habit of living to please others continues over time, it begins to shape the inner landscape of a person's life, not in ways that are obvious or dramatic, but in quiet shifts that accumulate. The person does not suddenly feel lost. Instead, they feel slightly disconnected, slightly uncertain, slightly tired in ways that rest does not seem to fix. One of the first things affected is clarity. Choices that once felt natural begin to feel heavier. Decisions take longer. There is hesitation, not because options are lacking, but because the person is no longer sure which desires are truly theirs. After years of adjusting to others, the internal signal that once guided direction becomes faint. This creates a subtle emotional strain. The person continues to show up, continues to meet expectations, but with growing effort. What once felt manageable now feels draining, not because the responsibilities increased, but because they are being carried without a clear sense of personal meaning. Over time, frustration can surface without a clear target. The person may feel irritated, restless, or withdrawn, yet unable to explain why. They are doing what they are supposed to do. They are being reliable, considerate, responsible, and still something feels wrong. This confusion often turns inward, becoming self-doubt rather than awareness. There is also a quiet grief that can emerge, not over a specific loss, but over a life that feels partially unlived. Moments pass without being fully inhabited. Achievements feel empty. Praise feels distant. The person may receive approval and still feel unseen, because the approval is directed at a version of themselves shaped by expectation. As this continues, emotional resilience weakens. Small challenges feel overwhelming. Motivation becomes inconsistent. The person may feel as though they are constantly pushing themselves forward without knowing what they are moving toward. Life feels busy, but strangely stagnant. Ignoring this state does not make it disappear. It simply becomes part of how life is experienced. The person adapts to the discomfort, carrying it quietly, assuming this is just how adulthood feels. They may even feel guilty for wanting more, for questioning a life that appears stable and functional. But the cost continues to grow. Living without inner alignment slowly erodes vitality. The person may feel less creative, less engaged, less alive. Not because they lack opportunity, but because their energy is consumed by maintaining acceptance rather than exploring purpose. This emotional deepening does not offer relief. It does not point toward resolution. It simply reveals what happens when a person spends too long responding to others without returning to themselves. The conflict remains open, not as a failure, but as an honest reflection of what it costs to postpone one's purpose for too long. At some point, a quiet awareness begins to form, not as a clear realization and not as a decision to change, but as a subtle noticing. The person becomes aware that something inside has been waiting for attention for a long time. Life has been moving forward, yet something essential has been left behind. This awareness often appears in ordinary moments, a pause between tasks, a brief sense of emptiness after a conversation, a question that arises without words. The person senses that they have been present everywhere, yet rarely present with themselves. There is a difference between being useful and being aligned. Being useful means responding well to what others need. Being aligned means recognizing what one's own life is asking for. When living to please others becomes the default, alignment slowly fades, even while usefulness increases. Billy Graham often viewed this stage as a fragile moment of inner recognition. Not a breaking point, but a soft opening. A moment when a person begins to notice that their sense of purpose has not disappeared, but has been neglected. This awareness does not demand action. It does not ask for confrontation or explanation. It simply allows the person to see the distance between the life they are living and the life they feel drawn toward. That distance may feel uncomfortable, but it is also honest. Nothing is resolved here. The expectations remain, the responsibilities continue. But something shifts quietly. The person starts to sense that pleasing everyone else has come at a cost, not a dramatic loss, but a gradual forgetting of their own direction. This awareness does not close the story, it leaves it open. And sometimes simply seeing what has been postponed is enough to change how the weight of it is carried, even if nothing else changes yet. Perhaps living to please others does not end with a clear conclusion. It does not suddenly stop once it is noticed. For many people, it remains woven into daily life, into habits, relationships, and decisions that were built over years. And maybe that is why the realization feels heavy. Not because something went wrong, but because so much time passed without being questioned. Billy Graham often approached this kind of inner conflict with patience rather than urgency. He understood that purpose is rarely lost in a single moment. It is usually set aside gradually, postponed in small ways, in the name of peace, acceptance, and responsibility. And when it is finally noticed, the feeling is not panic, but quiet grief. This reflection does not close that distance. It does not offer a final answer. What it does is allow the weight of postponement to be felt honestly, the sense that life was lived correctly, yet not completely. That much was given, yet something essential was held back. What was said here may continue to surface in ordinary moments, in conversations where words feel automatic, in decisions made quickly to avoid discomfort, in the quiet awareness that arises when there is nothing left to please for a moment, not as accusation, but as presence. Eu sugiro que você se inscreva no canal if this kind of reflection resonates with you. The videos here continue in this same calm rhythm, with depth and patience, exploring human conflicts that are often overlooked, always inspired by the way Billy Graham understood inner life, personal awareness, and purpose. Subscribing is not a commitment or a promise. It is simply a way to continue walking alongside reflections that respect time, silence, and honesty. And if at any point in this video you recognized yourself in the habit of living for others, the comments are open. It can be a short sentence, an unfinished thought, or simply a trace that this reflection reached you. Sometimes writing a few words is already a way of giving space to what has been waiting to be heard.